Why is your air conditioning system freezing up? Are your pipes freezing? Is your outside or inside coil freezing? Today on Tips for Homeowners, I'm Tad, and you're going to be learning more about how your unit operates, why it freezes, what's the main causes, and what should you do if it does freeze. I'm going to try to save you time, effort, and money today on this episode of Why is my air conditioner freezing? I'm Tad, let's get started. Before we talk about the top causes for your air conditioning system to freeze during the summer, we need to know how the unit operates so that we can better understand where it freezes first. You have an inside and an outside coil. Whether you have a split system where you have two pieces of equipment or one piece of equipment, you have two coils. And one coil is called an indoor coil, which is an evaporator coil, and that's where it freezes first. You also have another coil called an outdoor coil that's a condenser coil, and it rejects heat. So the one coil called the evaporator coil that absorbs heat is where it's going to freeze first. Why does it freeze? There are several reasons, but I need you to know that the evaporator coil is where it freezes first. It works at a lower pressure than the outdoor coil, and therefore it is more susceptible to freeze. Now let's talk about the several reasons that your unit freezes. By the way, that coil, that's evaporator coil, looks like this. Before we talk about what you should do in a situation where your air conditioning system freezes, I want to talk about the causes for your air conditioning system freezing up. Let's go to number one. Reason number one that your unit may be freezing up. This is a filter, and if your filter is dirty, then it causes a restriction for the airflow. And if the evaporator coil has a pressure drop because of low airflow, then that will cause your unit to freeze up. Make sure that not only your filter is clean, but your vents are open. That is another thing that causes your unit to freeze up, and I just want to mention that before we go to another reason that your unit could be freezing up. Dirty evaporator coils cause unit to freeze up. Why? Because it causes low airflow. If you have a dirty evaporator coil like this one, then you may need to get it cleaned. I don't recommend cleaning it yourself if you're not a professional, but if you'd like to, make sure you get some no rinse evaporator fresh coil cleaner. This right here is evaporator coil cleaner, and it's wonderful because you can spray it on the evaporator and it's self-rinse. If your coil is really dirty, then you may need to get some more progressive measures to make sure that you clean it properly. You might need some other type of coil cleaner and a water hose and a good nozzle to make sure that you clean it properly so that it won't have any low airflow situation. But a dirty evaporator coil is another reason your unit could be freezing up. So make sure you don't have an evaporator coil that looks like this. Make sure you have an evaporator coil that looks like this. All right, let's go to another reason. Your unit may be low on refrigerant. Refrigerant is something that the unit uses that circulates through the system that causes the heat transfer. And if it doesn't have the amount of refrigerant that it needs, it will not only lack in capacity and efficiency, but it may also cause it to freeze. And if you don't have refrigerant, it could be because you have a leak. So you may need your technician to give you a leak check using either a leak detector, using a visual inspection, or my favorite way, using nitrogen, a regulator, and then doing a soap test. Usually it leaks in the evaporator more than it does the condenser, but your leak could be anywhere. You may need some torches, and you may need to do some brazing with some solder to be able to fix your leak. Hopefully it's fixable. Usually when a unit's 15 or 20 years old, I recommend replacing the piece of equipment depending on the price of the repair compared to the price of the new equipment. So you may have a unit that's low on refrigerant. How do you find that out? You get your technician to hook his gauges up and to check the pressures. So that's one cause that could be your problem in the field. Let's move on. This is a TXV, a thermostatic expansion valve. It's a metering device that's used in air conditioning systems that regulates the amount of refrigerant that goes inside of the evaporator coil. It has a bulb, a diaphragm, a seat, and it's supposed to open and close, but sometimes it can get stuck. And usually I either have to replace this TXV or I have to add some type of additive like AC Renew to help to aid in this stuck TXV. So you may have to replace this. These parts are about $150. You may have to replace your refrigerant as well, so it may cost a little more. Sometimes this costs upwards of $500 to replace in the field. I've never had one cost $1,000 or upwards, so that would be an unreasonable price. This right here runs about $100 to $200, depends on how many ounces, how big of a can you get of AC Renew, but this helps this to not stick. But this is a common problem in the field that causes units to freeze. So let's move on. You have a forced draft air conditioning system usually, and the air passes across the evaporator, and you have a blower motor that accomplishes that air movement. So if your airflow from your blower motor is not proper, then that can cause your unit to freeze up. So making sure that your evaporator fan motor or your indoor fan motor is operating correctly is a good thing to check. You need to make sure that not only your capacitor for your indoor fan is good, that way it's running at the speed it needs to, but also your fan relay. I've had units that are intermittently shutting on and shutting off and shutting on and shutting off and shutting on because they had a bad relay, and that was causing the unit to intermittently freeze. If your evaporator fan is not pushing the proper amount of airflow through that coil, then it's going to cause a lower pressure and it's going to cause it to freeze. So making sure that your blower motor, that's this right here, is operating correctly is going to help you in the long run. If you get a service and clean every year, or someone's performing maintenance on your equipment, they need to be checking the capacitor. They need to be checking the relay. They need to be checking the amp draw on the fan motor to make sure that the run load amps is proper, that the bearings are good. Evaporator fan motors, blower motors are common issues that can cause the air conditioning system to freeze. What should you do when your air conditioning system freezes up? Well, you should make sure that you have a technician that you can call that can either provide a heat gun that can thaw the evaporator coil out, or you need to make sure that you can turn your fan onto the on operation. If you have a thermostat in your home that you use to operate your air conditioning system, there's something that you can do for you to better save yourself some time and some effort in thawing out the piece of equipment until your technician arrives, because a technician will have to use either a heat gun or a set of torches to be able to thaw that coil, or they'll turn it in heating. But there's something you can do to be able to help yourself get that thing thawed out and get it back running. Let's go take a look at the thermostat and what you can do. If your unit is frozen and you have your thermostat on the cooling operation, you need to quickly turn it to the off. And once it's off, then you turn your fan to where it's on and no longer in the automatic function to where it runs when the unit runs. If you have your fan to your on function, then that means your indoor fan is going to blow across your evaporator coil and it's going to thaw that coil out. You should not run your unit in the cooling mode if your unit is frozen. And this will give your unit time. Usually takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on what type of system you have and how big your evaporator coil is and how frozen it is. But then you can call your technician and let him know that your unit's in the fan on and the unit's in the off mode, so it's no longer going to be frozen when he arrives. That way, you don't have to wait on the unit to thaw to get your unit fixed or serviced or get it charged, whatever the problem may be. Your ductwork could be the reason that your air conditioning system is freezing up. I've had new installs where the older ductwork just wasn't sized properly for the newer units. And because there wasn't enough supply vents in the home, the unit froze up. How do we know how many vents we need? I've got other videos on my playlist, Tips for Homeowners, that you can check out that shows you how many vents you need for each tonnage of air conditioning. How do you figure out the size of your air conditioner or what tonnage it is? Check out my video on how to tell what size my air conditioner is. So ductwork has a big effect on the operating of the unit. And also it has a big effect on the pressures of the coils when they're operating. So if you don't have enough airflow, you're going to have an issue with your unit freezing up. How do we know? We have a technician who is trained, come to our house, and they measure the airflow and they figure out the CFM of the unit. If you don't know how to do that, you don't have a technician that can do that, then you probably need to find one, because that is very important. It's very important that you have a certain amount of feet per minute coming out of your supply vents and going across your return vent that is where your filter is. So we need to make sure that our ductwork is sized properly, and the newer systems require bigger ductwork than the older ones. Why? Because you have newer operating pressures and temperatures because of the refrigerant that they use. So ductwork is a big key in not only the efficiency, but the operating effectiveness of the air conditioning system that you have. And it can cause your unit to freeze up. If you liked the video and you learned something, hit the like button, hit the notification button if you want more. This is Tips for Homeowners. If you want more videos for you as a homeowner, check out my playlist, Tips for Homeowners. If you want to support me, you thought this was worth $1, check out my Patreon. As always, I appreciate it. I'm Tad, you're watching Tips for Homeowners, and I will keep you cool if you let me.